Alice stood in the office hallway, peering through the glass partition into her boss's office. Bracing herself for the inevitable meeting, she nervously tapped her fingers on the edge of a document folder. Mr. Peterson looked like he was about to explode. His face was flushed crimson, and his fingers convulsively clutched a sheet of paper that he alternately brought close to his eyes and then angrily flung aside. 3 minutes ago, the phone on her desk had rung sharply, and the boss's cold voice had come through the receiver. "Roberts, my office, now." And now she stood here, feeling an inexplicable anxiety building inside her. Through the glass, she could see Mr. Peterson muttering something into the air, a long phrase that, fortunately, was inaudible behind the thick glass. Judging by his furious articulation, those words weren't meant for delicate ears and were clearly directed at her. Alice frantically grasped the nickel-plated door handle as if it were a lifesaver. Taking a deep breath, she resolutely pushed the door open. "Mr. Peterson, I'm here." The man raised a grim gaze at his employee, revealing thinly veiled irritation. Silently, he gestured to the chair opposite him, waiting for Alice to perch on the very edge of the seat, as if ready to jump up and run at any moment. "Roberts," he began with a deceptive calmness that, a second later, turned into a thunderous roar. "Do you seriously expect me to swallow all this nonsense?" He sharply nodded at the sheet of tables lying before him, and Alice recognized with horror her report, or rather, not her own, but the one her friend Sarah had prepared for her. The young woman lowered her head, feeling a hot wave of shame wash over her face. "What's wrong?" She barely managed to whisper. "Mr. Peterson flung the ill-fated document across the desk, and the sheets scattered before her like a fan. "Not a single figure adds up here." "Ho!" he bellowed, slamming his palm on the table so hard that the massive crystal ashtray jumped. "Did you put this together while completely drunk?" Alice shook her head, feeling the flush of shame deepen on her face. She hadn't even bothered to check what Sarah had done for her, trusting her implicitly. And this was the result. "I'm sorry. I'll fix everything," she mumbled, already realizing that she had been outright set up, and by whom? Her best friend, as she thought. "I'm giving you until the end of the day." The boss cut her off coldly, without even glancing at his subordinate's bewildered face. "Otherwise, I'll have to find another candidate for the department head position." The promotion she had dreamed of for the past 6 months, for which she had worked overtime and denied herself everything, now it could slip through her fingers because of foolish trust in a friend. Alice rushed out the door, wanting nothing more than to leave the boss's office as quickly as possible. As she was leaving, she heard him say from behind, "Don't let me down. Roberts, I was counting on you." Those words were tinged with disappointment, and it hurt even more. Alice burst into their shared office and immediately shot an angry glare at Sarah. Sarah was sitting at her desk with a demonstratively innocent look, sorting some papers, but encountering Sarah's sly smile, Alice knew conversation was useless. Silently, she walked to her desk, sat down, and turned on her computer. "What, Alice dear, Mr. Peterson didn't appreciate your efforts?" Sarah drawled lazily, swinging her foot in a fashionable shoe. "What a pity." "You did this on purpose, didn't you?" Alice stated, not taking her eyes off the monitor. "Oh, come on." Sarah widened her eyes theatrically. "I was just busy with my own stuff. You know, not everyone has such skills with numbers as you do." Her voice dripped with thinly veiled falsehood, and Alice finally understood the whole picture. Sarah was also being considered for the promotion. Apparently, when Mr. Peterson hinted that he was leaning more towards Alice's candidacy, Sarah decided to act and found the perfect moment when her exhausted colleague, burdened with personal problems, asked for help. "You know, I always thought you were a friend, Alice said softly, crumpling the ill-fated report. But now I see I was wrong. Oh, cut the sentimentality. Sarah waved her off. This is business, nothing personal. You already have everything: a husband, an apartment, prospects. What do I have? Only my job, and I'm not going to give up my place in the sun for you. Alice gritted her teeth and silently immersed herself in work. She had to completely redo the report, and every minute counted. Fragments of yesterday's conversation with Sarah, when she had confided in her about problems with her husband and his relatives, replayed in her head. How naive she had been to reveal all her weaknesses. Clenching her lips, Alice stared at the pop-up table. No, she would fix everything, even if it meant staying up all night. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, and Alice, with a heavy sigh, took it out. Her husband. She needed to let him know she would be late. "David, hi," she said, trying to keep her voice even, although after yesterday's argument, she didn't want to talk at all. "I'll be late tonight. I need to finish a report. Don't wait for me. Just eat dinner and go to bed." She expected annoyance, but not the blatant contempt that permeated her husband's every word. "You're driving me crazy with your work." David's voice was sarcastic and low, as if he was afraid someone might hear him. "Tell me, why did you even get married if I'm always home alone?" Alice sighed heavily and hung up, not wanting to continue the conversation. David was right in a way. She did spend a lot of time at work. But there was simply no other way to ensure their comfortable life. Her husband's salary was purely symbolic, and the main financial burden rested on her shoulders. What could she do? But the bottom line was minus one good friend, plus another reason for a fight with her husband. Yesterday's argument still resonated with pain. David had literally unloaded all his dissatisfaction on her that she was a terrible homemaker, cooked rarely and badly. The house was unkempt, and he, poor thing, left an empty house and returned to one just the same. Either quit and become a normal wife, or divorce. These words still rang in Alice's ears, but the most offensive thing was that before, there had been no such complaints. Everything had changed 6 months ago when his niece, Ashley, came to the city to apply for college. From that moment on, her mother-in-law, Mrs. Thompson, and sister-in-law, Lisa, began visiting frequently, ostensibly to check on Ashley, but in reality, constantly bad-mouthing Alice and turning her husband against her. "You're completely under your wife's thumb," Mrs. Thompson would tell her son at every opportunity. "A man should be a provider, not a kept man. And look at her, she's completely taken over with her career." Her sister-in-law echoed, "What kind of wife is she? Comes home late at night, doesn't cook dinner. The apartment's a mess. You need another one. David, a hardworking, caring wife." And the most terrible thing was that David, instead of stopping this flow of mud, began to agree with them. Lately, balancing work and home. Alice had been barely holding on, but it was getting worse every day. And today, she had also lost face in front of her boss, lost a friend, and was probably expecting another argument at home. Alice shook her head, fighting back unbidden tears, and immersed herself in studying invoices and reports. She simply had to correct that report. Deep in tables and figures, Alice didn't notice the office emptying. Colleagues went home. Even Sarah, with feigned concern, asked if she needed help, then added with a smile, "Though, you're too busy for me right now. Keep working. Keep working." When Alice finally finished, the clock showed 10 minutes to midnight. Stretching tiredly, she sighed contentedly. The meticulously checked columns of figures and even a short analytical forecast, such a report was not ashamed to be placed on the boss's desk, unlike Sarah's incomprehensible mess. Slowly gathering her things, Alice called a taxi and left the office. On the way home, her thoughts revolved around what had happened. How did it happen that her best friend turned out to be a traitor when her family life went downhill, and most importantly, how to deal with all this now? She crept into the apartment like a thief, very quietly. She really didn't want to wake her beloved and listen to another round of accusations. She'd get a good night's sleep and then listen tomorrow morning. But how surprised she was when, in the dark hallway, Alice saw a sliver of light coming from under the closed kitchen door, and then heard muffled voices. "Just bear with it a little longer. David, wait until she pays for my daughter's tuition, and then you can kick that cursed career woman out," Lisa hissed. "She's not worthy of you." "Yes, yes," her mother-in-law's squeaky voice echoed. "The house is dirty, the fridge is empty, and there's a pile of unwashed laundry, and the wife is out God knows where, completely crazy about her money." Alice froze in the darkness, waiting for her husband's answer. There was still a glimmer of hope that he wouldn't follow his mother and sister's lead, but no miracle happened. "Yeah, I understood everything a long time ago, Mom," David's voice rang out. "My friends' wives cook every day and pamper them with various dishes. While I'm stuck with semi-finished products, she's driving me crazy." Alice frowned. So that's how it was. When it came to paying for Ashley's tutors for college admission, and then her tuition, his wife's money was perfect. But now, she was in the way of this family. Her dear husband hadn't said anything like that when they bought this apartment without loans or mortgages. He had rejoiced like a child, urging them to conquer new heights. And now, what Alice stood in the doorway, feeling a wave of anger mixed with the bitterness of betrayal boiling inside her. In the dim light of the kitchen lamp, the faces of her mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and husband took on a comical expression, a mix of fear, bewilderment, and poorly concealed irritation at being caught off guard. "Good evening," Alice said dully, making no attempt to enter. "I hope I didn't interrupt." Her mother-in-law was the first to recover, her wrinkled face instantly transformed, taking on an expression of fake concern. "Alice, dear." "Mrs. Thompson cooed, adjusting her perfectly coiffed gray hair. "We've been waiting for you. Why do you work so hard? You can't earn all the money in the world." "Oh, and did she even succeed?" Lisa chuckled, fiddling with a massive bracelet on her plump arm. "Or maybe brother is doing some extra work." Lisa's coarse laugh grated on Alice's nerves. Alice winced as if from a toothache, remembering how many times she had tried to improve relations with her husband's family, how many gifts she had given, how many festive dinners she had cooked all in vain. They saw her only as an enemy who dared to take their boy away and claim the role of head of the family. "Guests, darling, haven't they stayed too long?" she asked her husband, pointedly polite, who was diligently avoiding her gaze. "Maybe it's time for them to go." David finally raised his heavy gaze to his wife. His eyes, once looking at her with tenderness, now radiated only coldness and irritation. "Mom and Lisa are staying overnight," he barked angrily, as if he himself was frightened by his sudden bravery. "They are my family, and I'm glad to have them." Alice felt herself losing control from exhaustion and stress. Behind her was a 12-hour workday, the betrayal of a colleague, the humiliation in front of her boss. In another situation, she would have swallowed her resentment, backed down, gone to the bedroom. But today, something inside snapped. The accumulated tension of 6 months demanded release. Jumping at her husband, she slammed her fist on the table so hard that the cups jumped. "I'm sick of your relatives," she screamed, feeling her voice tremble. "This isn't a homeless shelter. Let them get out, and you get out if you don't like something." A stunned silence hung in the kitchen. David froze with his mouth agape, clearly not expecting such resistance from his usually restrained wife. Her mother-in-law's jaw dropped, and Lisa slowly rose from her chair, her face contorted with malice. Oh, but you're wrong there, Alice, she hissed, advancing on Alice like a tank. The apartment belongs to my brother. You'll be the one who has to leave. Lisa's self-confidence shocked Alice to the core. Had David lied so much that his family truly believed he was the sole owner of the apartment that Alice had been paying for almost 5 years, saving every penny, while David changed one low-paying job after another? Alice looked disdainfully at her husband, who was staring out the window, and laughed loudly. Her laugh, nervous and slightly hysterical, made all three of them jump. "The apartment belongs to David only by a quarter," Alice stated, crossing her arms over her chest. "I can easily prove that in court with bank payments. So he can only host guests until 11 p.m. So, ladies, out, or I'm calling the police." Her husband's sister and mother-in-law exchanged glances, not knowing how to react. It was clear they didn't believe Alice's words, but something in her gaze, a determination bordering on fury, made them back away into the hallway. "David, is that really true?" Mrs. Thompson asked in a trembling voice. "Tell her it's all nonsense." But David remained silent, head bowed, and that silence was more eloquent than any words. "You'll regret this," Lisa hissed, pulling on her coat as if it had personally offended her. "All you career women are the same. You think money solves everything, and then you're left alone, unwanted by anyone. And you think rudeness and manipulation solve everything," Alice retorted, throwing open the front door. "Believe me, loneliness is better than a family like this." When the door slammed shut behind her relatives, Alice sank heavily onto a chair in the hallway. The adrenaline had faded, leaving only fatigue and emptiness. David stood leaning against the wall, his gaze lost. "Divorce," he said sadly, and it sounded more like an assertion than a question. Alice slowly raised her eyes. Standing before her was not the man she had once married. That David had been cheerful, ambitious, supported her career aspirations. This one had turned into a gloomy shadow, a puppet in the hands of his mother and sister. "Yes," she answered softly. "I can't live with a traitor." They spent the rest of the night in separate rooms. Alice lay awake for a long time, replaying the events of the past few months in her head. How imperceptibly everything had changed. How gradually her husband had turned from an ally into an enemy. And the strangest thing was, she felt no pain or regret, only emptiness and a desire to quickly end this chapter of her life. In the morning, when pale sunlight seeped through the blinds, Alice was already in the kitchen, mechanically stirring her coffee. A clear plan of action was forming in her head lawyer. Property division, a new life. Everything seemed so simple and obvious that she even wondered why she hadn't done it sooner. David appeared at the kitchen doorway, shifting uncomfortably from foot to foot. His crumpled face expressed a mix of guilt and confusion. "Alice, maybe we shouldn't rush," he began. "I spoke too hastily yesterday, and Mom and Lisa, you know how they are. They just worry about me." "Worry or use?" Alice asked, not taking her eyes off her cup. "They're manipulating you, David. They need my money for Ashley's tuition, for their whims, and you're letting them turn our lives into hell." "That's not fair," David flared up. "What about my family, and who am I?" Alice asked quietly, finally looking up at him. "Who do you think I am?" David fell silent, finding no answer, and that silence told Alice everything. "Pack your things," she said, finishing her coffee. "I'll call a lawyer today." "You can't just kick me out," David retorted. "I have rights to this apartment." "You do," Alice nodded. "Exactly 25%. The rest is mine. And if you don't want this story to become even more humiliating, I suggest we part ways amicably." Her husband looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. Perhaps he was. For the first time in a long time, He saw not a compliant, submissive wife, but a strong, self-assured woman who was no longer willing to tolerate disrespect. "What will Mom and Lisa say?" he mumbled, and that question seemed to concern him most of all. "That's no longer my concern." Alice shrugged. "Those are your problems, David, not mine." At work! Alice appeared exactly at the appointed time, composed and determined. She placed the edited report on Mr. Peterson's desk even before he arrived. When the boss called her into his office, she was ready for another dose of criticism. But to her surprise, he looked pleased. "Now this is completely different. Roberts?" He nodded, flipping through the pages. "This is exactly the kind of analysis I expected from you." What happened with the first version? Alice could have told the truth about Sarah's betrayal, but she decided it would look like an attempt to justify herself and shift responsibility. "I was careless," she answered curtly. "It won't happen again." Mr. Peterson looked at her carefully, as if trying to read something beyond her words. "Good." He finally nodded. "I'm counting on you." Roberts. The position of department head requires extreme accuracy and responsibility. "I understand." Alice nodded. "And I won't let you down." Oh, returning to her desk, she caught Sarah's wary glance. Sarah was clearly expecting to see Alice upset, her nerves frayed after yesterday's fiasco, but instead, a composed, confident woman stood before her. "So, the report was accepted after all?" Sarah asked with feigned surprise. "Of course," Alice calmly replied. "I redid it, worked all night." "Well, aren't you hard-working?" Sarah drawled, sifting through papers on her desk. "And your husband doesn't mind your late-night work?" "Ex-husband?" Alice corrected her. "We're getting divorced." A look of genuine surprise crossed Sarah's face, perhaps the first unfeigned emotion in a long time of their acquaintance. "How? Why?" "It happens." Alice shrugged. "People change. Priorities, too. I need to work." She turned back to her monitor, indicating that the conversation was over, but inside, a strange calm spread. For the first time in many months, she felt in control of her life. The workday flew by in a whirlwind of tasks. Alice focused on current assignments, trying not to think about the upcoming divorce process. But her thoughts kept returning to her morning conversation with David and his strange question, "What will Mom and Lisa say?" How did it happen that a grown man was so dependent on the opinions of his mother and sister? When they first met, David had been ambitious and independent. He supported her career aspirations, was proud of her successes, and made plans for the future. And then something changed. No, not something. Ashley appeared, and with her, Mrs. Thompson and Lisa became more active. They seemed to sense an opportunity to access Alice's financial resources and began methodically destroying their marriage, manipulating the weak-willed David. And the most offensive thing was that they almost succeeded. If not for the accidentally overheard conversation, Alice might have continued living in that toxic union for a long time, trying to please everyone around her and forgetting about herself. Returning home in the evening, Alice felt a strange lightness. For the first time in a long time, she didn't have to make excuses for coming home late, prepare for accusations, or try to please someone who had long ceased to value her. Opening the door with her key, she was surprised to find an unaccustomed silence in the apartment. David had left, taking only his personal belongings and an old laptop. On the kitchen table lay a note. "I'll stay at Mom's for now. Call me when you're ready to discuss property division." Alice crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash. She had nothing to discuss with a man who had betrayed her trust. The court would decide everything necessary. That evening, for the first time in many months, she allowed herself to relax. She took a bubble bath, ordered her favorite pizza, which David considered unhealthy junk, and settled down with a book on the sofa. No accusations, no sideways glances, no tension. The phone rang just as she was about to go to bed. The screen showed mother-in-law. "Alice, it's Mrs. Thompson," a squeaky voice said on the line. "I want to talk about David." "I'm afraid we have nothing to talk about," Alice answered calmly. "All questions now go through lawyers." "You can't do that to my boy!" Her mother-in-law's voice grew higher and more piercing. "He loves you. It's just that you don't give him any attention. And this apartment—" "Stop!" Alice cut her off. "I'm not discussing this. David is an adult, and he made his choice. Goodbye, Mrs. Thompson." She hung up the phone and, for good measure, put it in airplane mode. It was probably time to change her number. It was unlikely her ex-mother-in-law would leave her alone. The next day, Alice contacted a lawyer and initiated the divorce process. To her surprise, David didn't put up any obstacles. Apparently, realizing the precariousness of his position, he decided not to aggravate the situation. The divorce was quick, and the property division was surprisingly easy. Alice paid David the amount awarded by the court for his share of the apartment and let her ex-husband go free. Learning about the impending divorce, his sister heavily pressured David, asking why he agreed, who would now pay for her daughter's tuition, but it was too late to change anything. At work, fortunately, everything improved for Alice. A month after the divorce, she received the long-awaited promotion, becoming department head. Sarah, unable to hide her disappointment, soon resigned, finding a position at a competing company. Life flowed at a new rhythm. Alice bought the car she had long dreamed of, enrolled in Spanish classes, and began to dedicate more time to herself. Sometimes in the evenings, returning to her empty apartment, she felt a slight melancholy, but this feeling quickly passed, giving way to satisfaction with her independence and freedom. From mutual acquaintances, Alice occasionally heard news about her ex-husband. They said he had moved in with his mother, that Lisa constantly nagged him about the divorce and the loss of her cash cow, and that Ashley had been forced to transfer to a distance learning program due to a lack of money for tuition. Alice felt no schadenfreude listening to these stories, only a slight sadness that the man she once loved had turned out to be so weak and dependent. Life moved on, opening new doors and opportunities, and Alice was ready to move forward, without looking back at the past that was now behind her. Almost a year had passed since the divorce. Spring was blooming in full colors, and Alice walked down the street, enjoying the warm sun on her face. A lot had changed during this time. She had received a new position, bought a car, and even started thinking about moving to a more spacious apartment. The old one held too many memories, not always pleasant. "Alice, wait." A clear, young female voice stopped her in the middle of the sidewalk. Turning around, Alice saw a girl rushing towards her across the street, with blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. It took a few seconds to recognize her ex-husband's niece, Ashley. Ashley looked more grown up, but just as sweet and open as Alice remembered her. Her first impulse was to walk past, pretend she hadn't noticed her after all. This girl was part of the family that had ruined her marriage. But something in Ashley's sincere expression made Alice stop. "Ashley," she said in surprise as the girl ran up to her. "Alice, I'm so glad to see you." Ashley hugged her, completely disarming her former relative. "How are you?" Alice asked, awkwardly stepping back. Communicating with her ex-relatives wasn't part of her plan, but she didn't want to be rude to a girl who had always stayed out of family intrigues. "Good," Ashley smiled. "I'm studying, working. Can we sit somewhere I'd like to talk?" They settled in the nearest cafe, a small, cozy place with panoramic windows and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. Alice ordered a cappuccino, Ashley a green tea. For a while, they sat in silence, looking at each other. I've wanted to contact you for a long time, Ashley began, nervously stirring her tea, to thank you for everything you did for the tutors for the first year of college. Without you, I wouldn't have gotten in. Alice raised her eyebrows in surprise. This she definitely didn't expect. No need for thanks, she shrugged. That was a long time ago, and I did it not for you, but for the family. I know, Ashley nodded. But still, Mom and Grandma, they were wrong about everything. I tried to explain it to them, but they wouldn't listen. The girl spoke sincerely, with a slight blush of embarrassment on her cheeks. Alice watched her carefully, noting the striking difference from her mother and grandmother. There wasn't a hint of their pettiness, greed, or malice in Ashley. "How's your studies?" Alice asked, deciding to change the subject. "Hard," Ashley admitted honestly. "After you and Uncle David divorced, I had to switch to distance learning and start working to pay tuition. No one wanted to pay for it." She said it without accusation, just stating a fact. Alice felt a pang of guilt. After all, the girl had become an unwitting victim of the family conflict. Mom decided Uncle David should pay for everything now. Ashley continued with a bitter smile. And when she realized he didn't have that kind of money... Anyway, I'm on my own. You know, I'm even glad. You always have to rely only on yourself. "Where do you work?" Alice asked, surprised by the girl's maturity. "At a call center in the evenings." Ashley replied, "The schedule is flexible, so I can make time for my classes. I live in a dorm. After the divorce, Grandma offered for me to move in with her. But," she hesitated, choosing her words, "but you wouldn't have been able to stand living under the same roof with her." Alice finished for her. "Exactly." Ashley nodded with relief. "You understand she would control my every move, tell me how to live. Mom is the same. They were sure Uncle David should support the whole family, including me. And when it turned out he didn't have those capabilities..." She didn't finish, but Alice already understood what happened next. Her mother-in-law and sister-in-law, not getting what they wanted, had surely made David's life hell, blaming him for all their troubles. "I heard he remarried," Alice asked, surprised that the topic didn't evoke any painful feelings in her. "Yes," Ashley confirmed. "About 2 months after the divorce, Mom and Grandma introduced him to some acquaintance of theirs. They married him off to a real homemaker, caring and domestic. You know, the complete opposite of you." She paused, afraid she might offend her former aunt, but Alice only smiled. "And how happy is he?" she asked without any irony, with genuine interest. Ashley shrugged vaguely. "Hard to say. He lives in a rented apartment. His shirts are ironed, dinner is always on the table, but he doesn't look happy. He constantly complains about lack of money. His new wife has never worked a day in her life and doesn't seem to plan to... And her demands..." Ashley shook her head. "She wants fashionable boots, bags, and fur coats, and Uncle David is barely making ends meet." "Well, he made his choice," Alice calmly remarked, stirring her cooling coffee. "I wouldn't say it was his choice." Ashley disagreed. "More like he was forced again. He constantly argues with Mom about your divorce, says she ruined everything with her interference." "And Lisa?" Alice inquired. "Oh, she now pretends she doesn't even know this new wife." Ashley scoffed. "Though she was the one who set them up. She and Grandma have formed a new battle alliance and hiss that poor Uncle David constantly gets the wrong women." Alice couldn't help but laugh. The story was both sad and comical. "And how are you?" Ashley asked with genuine interest. "Are you doing well?" "Yes." Alice nodded. "Work is going great. I got a promotion. I'm thinking about changing apartments, maybe even cities." "You're so strong," Ashley said with a hint of envy. "You know what you want, and you go for it. I wish I could be like that." You're already on the right path, Alice replied seriously. Independence and responsibility for your own life, that's a very mature stance, especially for your age. They talked for about another hour. Ashley spoke about her studies, her future plans, the challenges of independent living. Alice listened, gave advice, shared her experiences. Strangely, with this girl, almost a stranger to her, she felt more kinship than with her ex-husband and his family. When it was time to say goodbye, Ashley unexpectedly asked, "Can we see each other sometimes? I understand that after everything that happened, you probably don't want to have anything to do with our family, but you're the only sane person I can talk to." Alice pondered. Was it wise to maintain contact with her ex-husband's relative? Wouldn't it remind her of the unpleasant past? But looking into the girl's sincere eyes, she couldn't refuse. "Okay," Alice agreed. "Let's exchange numbers. But let's agree right away. No talk about your mom, grandma, and uncle. That's a closed topic." "Of course," Ashley readily nodded. "Thank you, Alice. You have no idea how important this is to me." After saying goodbye to the girl, Alice headed home. A strange calm settled over her. The conversation with Ashley had unexpectedly put a final end to the story of her failed marriage. Now, the past truly remained behind her. A week after meeting Ashley, Alice was returning home late from work. It had been a demanding workday quarterly report, meeting with management, budgeting for the next quarter. She felt a pleasant tiredness from a job well done and anticipated an evening with a book and a glass of wine. Near the entrance to her apartment building, Alice noticed a familiar figure. David looked haggard, with dark circles under his eyes, and his once fashionable jacket seemed worn and too large for his thinned frame. "We need to talk," he said instead of a greeting, as Alice approached. "About what?" she asked coldly, taking out her keys. "I think we discussed everything during the divorce." "Alice, please." Despair laced his voice. "I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. Mom, Lisa, they manipulated me, and I was too weak to resist." Alice silently looked at her ex-husband. Once, this man had been dear to her. She had cared for him, supported him, made plans together, and he had betrayed her trust. "And what do you want now?" she asked, knowing the answer beforehand. "A second chance?" David took a step towards her. "We could try again. I've changed. Mom doesn't interfere in my life anymore. I hardly even talk to her and Lisa. I realized how wrong I was." "What about your new wife?" Alice interrupted him. "The one who's a real homemaker and creates comfort for you?" David winced as if from a toothache. "We're on the verge of divorce," he admitted. She's not at all what she seemed. She demands money I don't have, constantly blames me for not being able to provide her with a decent life. And you decided to come back to me." Alice couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. "To the one you called a career woman, a worthless homemaker. To the one you were ready to kick out of your own apartment for your mommy and sister." "I was a fool." David lowered his head. "A weak, pathetic fool. But I've changed, really. I realized what I lost." Alice looked at him carefully. This man was indeed suffering, but was it suffering from an awareness of his mistakes, or just from the discomfort of his current situation? "You know, David," she finally said, "I don't hold anything against you. I really don't. But we're not meant to be. What was between us is broken, and I don't want to build a relationship on ruins." "Don't you miss our life at all?" he asked bitterly. "Our evenings together, our conversations, our plans." "Sometimes I do," Alice admitted honestly. "But I don't miss the constant accusations, the ultimatums, the need to justify every delay at work. And I definitely don't miss your mom and sister with their eternal dissatisfaction." "I wouldn't let them interfere," David assured her passionately. I swear, just like you didn't let them before? Alice shook her head. No, David, you haven't changed. You're just looking for an easy way out of a difficult situation again. I'm sorry, but I won't be your fallback anymore. She turned and walked towards the building entrance, feeling a surge of certainty in the correctness of her decision. I'll wait, David called after her. I'll prove I've changed. Alice didn't turn around. Closing the apartment door behind her, she leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. Strangely, instead of the expected turmoil, she felt only calm and lightness, as if the last thread connecting her to the past had finally broken. A few days later, the phone rang. It was Ashley. Alice! Hi! The girl's voice sounded excited. I heard Uncle David came to see you. He's telling everyone that you're considering his proposal for reconciliation. Alice chuckled. Of course. David remains true to form, prefers to live in a fantasy world instead of accepting reality. Don't worry, she reassured the girl. There will be no reconciliation. I made that clear to him. That's what I thought. Ashley sighed with relief. He just sounded so enthusiastic, like, Grandma is already planning how she'll arrange your apartment to her taste. What? Alice couldn't believe her ears. They haven't understood anything? Exactly. Ashley laughed bitterly. They never understand. They're always convinced everything will go according to their script. After this conversation, Alice was completely firm in her decision to move. The prospect of constantly running into her ex-husband at the building entrance or encountering his family at the grocery store was not appealing. Finding a new apartment took about a month. Alice chose a modern apartment complex on the other side of the city, with a gated community, underground parking, and panoramic windows. The sale price of her old apartment more than covered the down payment, and she could afford the mortgage with her salary. The move was scheduled for Saturday. Alice hired a team of movers, and they quickly and professionally packed and transported all her belongings. By evening, she was standing in the spacious living room of her new home, enjoying the quiet and anticipating a new chapter in her life. A knock at the door startled her. She hadn't given her new address to anyone except her parents and Ashley. At the doorstep stood Mrs. Thompson, impeccably dressed and coiffed as always. How could you do this to David? She began without preamble, taking a step forward as if to enter. He's suffering so much, and you didn't even give him a chance. Alice blocked her path, not allowing her to cross the threshold. Mrs. Thompson, she said calmly, I don't know how you found my address, but I'm asking you to leave. David and I are divorced, and that's a final decision. How heartless you are. Her mother-in-law threw her hands up. My boy did everything for you. We welcomed you into our family, and you never welcomed me. Alice interrupted her. You tolerated me because of my money. And now that David has realized his new wife can't provide the same standard of living, you've decided to get your old cash cow back. It won't work. Mrs. Thompson's face contorted with anger. How dare you, Goodbye, Alice said firmly and closed the door without listening to the tirade. Leaning against the door, she heard her mother-in-law ranting in the hallway for a few more minutes, promising that Alice would regret her decision. Then everything fell silent. Alice walked into the living room and sank into an armchair. Strangely, instead of the expected distress, she felt only satisfaction. She was finally free from the past and all its ghosts. Ahead lay only a new life. Free, full of opportunities and hopes. A persistent knock on the door came just as she was about to fall asleep. At the threshold stood David, disheveled and clearly drunk. You can't just up and leave, he blurted out as Alice opened the door. We have to talk. David, I'm tired, she replied calmly. It's late. Go home. Home, he scoffed bitterly. I don't have a home. Mom kicked me out when she found out you moved. Said I couldn't even keep you around so they could. He trailed off. but Alice understood what he meant. So they could continue to use my money, she finished for him. See, David, nothing has changed. You're still a puppet in their hands. I've changed, he exclaimed desperately. Really, I've changed. I told them all to go to hell. I'm even getting divorced. And what then? Alice asked tiredly. You'll move in with me, live off my money, and then the accusations will start again, that I work too much, that I'm a bad homemaker. No, David, this is a vicious cycle, and I've broken free. You never loved me, he said bitterly. Otherwise, you would have given me a chance. I loved you, Alice said softly, but love doesn't survive where there's no respect. Goodbye, David. I wish you to find your happiness. She closed the door, feeling a strange sense of relief. Perhaps this was the last conversation with the man who had once been a part of her life, and she was glad it ended without mutual accusations and reproaches. The next day, Alice woke up with a feeling of newness and freedom. For the first time in a long time, she didn't have to report to anyone, please anyone, meet anyone's expectations. She could simply be herself, without fear of judgment, without guilt, without constant tension. Picking up her phone, she sent a message to Ashley, inviting you to my housewarming this weekend. Only the closest people will be there. The answer came instantly. Yay, what can I bring? Alice smiled. Strange how life sometimes turns out. Who would have thought that out of her entire ex-family? Ashley would become truly close to her that weekend, setting the table for guests. Alice found herself truly happy for the first time in a long time, not the fleeting joy that comes from a successful purchase or a pleasant compliment, but a deep, calm happiness of a person living in harmony with herself. A knock at the door announced the arrival of the first guests. Alice went to open it, smiling at her thoughts. A new chapter of her life was just beginning, and she was determined to make it the best one. 2 years later. Alice sat in the conference room, watching her team present a new project to potential investors. Around a huge table of polished wood sat about a dozen people in business suits, representatives of a large European holding company ready to invest significant funds in their development. Each slide was accompanied by nods and approving notes in notebooks. Alice felt proud of each employee. They were all top-class professionals, carefully selected for her new division. Paul, a young analyst she had lured from a competing company 6 months ago, especially shone, offered not only a high salary, but also the opportunity to implement his own ideas. After that memorable divorce from David, her career had skyrocketed. First, a promotion to department head, then an offer to lead a new direction, and now the position of deputy general director at a large company. Mr. Peterson, her former boss, had always believed in her potential and was now happy to see his protégé succeed. When the presentation ended with applause and handshakes, Alice approached her team, trying to suppress a wide smile. After all, she needed to maintain the image of a strict leader. "Excellent work," she praised, gathering everyone in the corner of the conference room, especially the financial part. "You were able to answer all questions without a hitch." She paused, surveying the pleased faces of her employees. "We all deserve a break. I suggest we celebrate our success at the Gilded Spoon tonight, at the company's expense." Of course. The employees enthusiastically buzzed, discussing the upcoming evening. The Gilded Spoon was one of the most expensive and prestigious restaurants in the city, with Italian cuisine and live music. Getting a table there on a Friday night was virtually impossible without booking several weeks in advance. "How did you manage to book the Gilded Spoon on a Friday?" Ms. Roberts Catherine, a newcomer from the marketing department, asked admiringly. "I have my ways." Alice smiled mysteriously. not specifying that the restaurant owner was a longtime friend from her college days and there was always a free table for her. Returning to her office, Alice immersed herself in current affairs. A stack of documents awaited her signature on the table, several urgent emails, and a request to participate in an international conference in Miami. Work had always been more than just a way to earn money for her. It was a true passion. Perhaps that's why David had never been able to understand her. For him, his wife's career ambitions were something alien, incomprehensible. Thoughts of her ex-husband visited her less and less often. Initially, right after the divorce, he regularly appeared at her new home, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with gifts, begging for a second chance. But Alice was adamant. Then the calls and visits became less and less frequent until they stopped altogether. From Ashley. She knew that David had divorced his second wife 6 months after the wedding, unable to withstand the constant arguments over money. For some time, he lived with his mother, then rented a room from some distant relative. He changed jobs regularly, never staying anywhere for long, a classic story of a man who never managed to find himself and his path. The phone on the table rang, pulling Alice out of her thoughts. "Ms. Roberts, Ashley is asking for you," her secretary, Margaret, informed her. "Should I tell her you're busy?" "No. Connect her," Alice asked, involuntarily smiling. In these 2 years, she and Ashley had truly grown close. The girl had successfully graduated from university with honors and was now working at a major tech company. Alice was proud of her, like an older sister. "Hi!" Ashley's cheerful voice came through the receiver. "Am I interrupting important business?" "I always have a minute for you," Alice replied, leaning back in her chair. "How are things? How's the new job?" "Everything's super," Ashley reported enthusiastically. "They appointed me project manager. Can you imagine? After only 3 months of work, I had no doubt you'd climb quickly." Alice genuinely rejoiced. "You have all the makings of a leader." "It's all thanks to you." Ashley's voice held gratitude. "If it weren't for your advice and support, listen, that's why I'm calling. I wanted to invite you to dinner on Sunday. We'll celebrate my promotion." "I'd love to," Alice agreed. "But tonight, I'm treating the team at the Gilded Spoon to celebrate a successful presentation. Maybe you'd like to join. It'll be fun." The Gilded Spoon? Seriously. Ashley whistled admiringly. "Of course. I'll join. What time?" "Around 8. The table is reserved under my name." Ending the conversation. Alice returned to work, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the upcoming evening. There was something symbolic about her life now being filled with people who valued her for who she was: strong, independent, ambitious. No accusations. No attempts to change her or fit her into someone else's expectations. In the evening, entering the Gilded Spoon, Alice immediately noticed her colleagues already occupying a large table in the back of the room. The restaurant was full, soft lighting, gentle live music, and the aroma of Italian dishes created a special atmosphere. Waiters in white shirts and black vests skillfully navigated between tables. "Ms. Roberts, we've been waiting for you," Paul exclaimed, rising to greet her. "Sorry I'm late." Alice smiled, taking off her light coat. "I was finishing an important call. We're also waiting for Ashley. She'll be here soon." The evening passed in a warm, almost family-like atmosphere. Alice always tried to maintain friendly relationships within her team, without excessive familiarity, but with genuine interest in each employee's life. They discussed not only work, but also books, movies, and travels. Someone talked about their children, someone about their vacation plans. "Ms. Roberts, is it true that you started as a regular manager?" Maria, a young employee who recently joined the team, asked. "True." Alice smiled, cutting a piece of steak. "Everyone starts somewhere." The main thing is never to stop striving for more and not to let anyone knock you off your path. Exactly, Paul added, raising his wine glass. Sometimes the closest people can become the biggest obstacles. It's important to know how to distinguish constructive criticism from attempts to manipulate. My sister's husband is like that. Catherine sighed. He constantly tells her that her place is at home with the kids, but she wants to work and develop. I hope she doesn't listen to him, Alice inquired. Fortunately not. Catherine smiled. She says she's seen what happened to friends who abandoned their careers for family and then were left with nothing, no profession, no means of support, no prospects. The conversation smoothly transitioned to discussing new projects and future plans. Alice participated in the discussion, but part of her attention was captured by a couple sitting at a table by the window. A middle-aged woman with carefully styled hair was lecturing the man opposite her, gesturing energetically. The man sat slumped, head bowed, only occasionally trying to interject a word. Something in his posture, in the line of his shoulders, seemed familiar to Alice, and when he turned to call the waiter, she recognized David with surprise. Years had not been kind to her ex-husband. He had aged noticeably. Gray hair appeared in his temples, and his once toned physique had acquired a substantial belly, but most importantly, his eyes held a kind of extinguished hopelessness, as if life was slowly draining all the vitality from him. The woman sitting opposite him was unknown to Alice. Judging by her resemblance to Mrs. Thompson, the same thin lips, the same expression of eternal dissatisfaction on her face, she could be some relative of her ex-mother-in-law. She continued to lecture David, occasionally tapping her finger on the table for emphasis. Alice, are you okay? Paul quietly asked, noticing her distraction. Yes, everything's fine, she smiled, returning to the conversation. Just saw a familiar face. At that moment, the restaurant doors swung open, and Ashley entered the room, an elegant, self-assured young woman, completely unlike the insecure girl Alice had met 2 years ago. Her appearance did not go unnoticed. Several men at nearby tables followed her with their gazes. Sorry I'm late, Ashley exclaimed, coming to their table. Terrible traffic. No problem. Alice stood up to hug her. We just started. Meet my team. Ashley quickly integrated into the group, charming everyone with her spontaneity and humor. She talked about her new job, her future plans, and her graduate studies, which she was starting in September. Looking at her, Alice felt almost a maternal pride. The girl had managed to escape the influence of her toxic family and find her own path. Out of the corner of her eye, Alice noticed that David had also paid attention to their noisy group. His gaze swept over the faces, stopped at Alice, and something resembling a mixture of recognition and longing flashed in his eyes. Then he saw Ashley, and his eyes widened in surprise. Excuse me, I'll be a minute. Alice rose from the table and headed to the restroom, intentionally choosing a path past David's table. As she passed, she nodded to her ex-husband. Hello, David. He flinched as if caught doing something indecent. Alice, you look wonderful, he mumbled, standing up. Thank you. She smiled reservedly. You too. Look. The woman at David's table looked at Alice with interest, like a rare exhibit in a museum. So this is the famous Alice, she asked, with poorly concealed curiosity. I've heard a lot about you from Mrs. Thompson. I hope not everything you heard was true, Alice chuckled, maintaining her composure. Mrs. Thompson tends to exaggerate. This is my cousin, Jessica. David introduced the woman awkwardly. She came to visit Mom, and we're just having dinner. Very nice to meet you. Alice nodded, feeling no desire to prolong the conversation. I won't disturb you. Enjoy your evening. She was about to leave when David grabbed her hand. "Alice, wait!" There was an almost pleading tone in his voice. "Maybe we could talk sometime later. Alone, I need your advice." Alice gently but firmly pulled her hand free. "I don't think that's a good idea. David," she shook her head. "We're on different paths, and it's better for everyone this way." "I see you're doing well," he said bitterly, gesturing towards her table where colleagues were animatedly chatting with Ashley. "Career, friends, universal respect. And me. And you could have had the same." Alice calmly finished for him. "If you hadn't let others decide for you, you were always stronger." David sighed. "And I just went with the flow." There was no accusation in his words, only a statement of fact. Alice suddenly felt that the old hurts and bitterness she had carried for so long were beginning to recede. Standing before her was not a villain who had ruined her life, but simply a weak person who had never found the strength to resist the manipulations of those close to him. "It's never too late to change course." "David," she said more gently, "but that has to be your decision, no one else's." She nodded goodbye and walked on, feeling her ex-husband's gaze on her. Something about this encounter brought closure to her past, finally closing that chapter. When Alice returned to the table, Ashley looked at her with concern. "I saw you were talking to Uncle David," she said quietly. "Is everything okay?" "More than okay." Alice smiled, raising her glass. "Let's toast to new beginnings and to never looking back." Colleagues picked up the toast, and the evening continued in the same warm atmosphere. After a while, Alice noticed that the table by the window was empty. David and his companion had left without saying goodbye. After dinner, as everyone began to disperse, Ashley lingered. "Can I ask a personal question?" she asked when they were alone. "Of course." Alice nodded, putting on her coat. "Did you ever regret the divorce?" Ashley looked embarrassed. "It's just, you're always so strong, so confident, and Uncle David, he just never recovered." Alice pondered for a moment, looking out the window at the evening city. "You know, sometimes a breakup isn't a tragedy, but a liberation," she finally said. "For both. It's just that some use that freedom to grow, and some get lost in it." "Do you think he'll ever find his way?" Ashley's voice held genuine concern. "That depends entirely on him." Alice shrugged. "Everyone chooses for themselves to live on the ruins of others' expectations, or to build their own life." They left the restaurant into the warm summer evening. The city sparkled with lights, inviting them to enjoy life. Alice took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm and confidence spreading within her. "Come to my place," she suggested. "We'll sit on the balcony and talk. I have some great wine." "I'd love to." Ashley smiled. "But only on one condition on Sunday. You still come to my place for dinner. I'll make my famous lasagna." "It's a deal." Alice laughed, and they walked to the parking lot, sitting on the spacious balcony with glasses of wine. They talked about the future, about career plans, about travel, about dreams. No regrets about the past, no bitterness about missed opportunities, just a look forward into a new day full of hopes and possibilities. Somewhere on the other side of the city, David sat in a small rented apartment, looking at a photograph where he and Alice were still happy. The encounter at the restaurant had stirred long-forgotten feelings in him, not so much love for his ex-wife, but a longing for who he could have been by her side, for how his life could have turned out if he had found the strength to resist his mother and sister, if he had believed in himself and their shared future. The phone on the table rang. "Mom, again," wanting to know where he was and what he was doing. David stared at the blinking screen without moving. For the first time in his life, he felt that he no longer wanted to answer that call. He didn't want to hear the eternal accusations, didn't want to justify himself, didn't want to be a puppet in someone else's hands. It's never too late to change course. Alice's words came back to him. Perhaps it wasn't too late for him either. Perhaps it was time to finally take his life into his own hands. David resolutely turned off his phone and set it aside. Tomorrow, he would start a new life his own, without regard for others' expectations and demands. And Alice, well, she was right. Their paths had diverged forever, and no one was to blame. It just happened that way. Everyone must go their own way, even if at first it seems too difficult and frightening. David stood up, walked to the window, and opened it, letting the fresh night air into the apartment. For the first time in a long time, he felt something akin to hope. Life continued for all of them.